If you want to continue your conversations, why there's a pub right back there. Go back there. For those of you who do not know, my name is Loren Horton. The program tonight is entitled, What's All the Fuss About? And I am absolutely astonished that this many people came to hear something that you really don't know what you're going to hear.
Wouldn't you say? Can you talk a little louder?
I can move this up, but I can't talk louder.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe my administrative assistant can pep it up. And we'll wait to see. Lindsay is especially skilled in electronics. So, okay, is that any better? Oh, all right. Those of you who really want to hear me now can hear me. One of the things that I'm going to, that's echoing in my ears, one of the things that I want to explore tonight, which I know we can't solve, but it is, why is the media, print and broadcast alike, in the United States so fascinated with the British royal family? I find that an inexplicable thing because back in the late 18th century, we fought a colonial rebellion to get away from them. So why are we so preoccupied with them now? I described it in the Acorns as a frenzy and a spasm. Well, it just seems like an obsession. On my computer, and I'm very unskilled in computers, but I can bring up the screen, and it has a row of little teasers here of things that I might want to look at more, and then start scrolling with other things that I might want to see more. And so many of them seem to be about the British royal family, and I thought, well, I'll count them. So about 2 weeks ago, I counted them, and there were 54 little teasers about the British royal family. Then earlier this week, I guess that would be yesterday, I did the same thing again, and there were 81 teasers about the British royal family. What is this all about? I should ask before I begin, I guess, are any of you descended from the British royal family? Do any of you claim relationships with the British or any other European royal family? If so, you better leave right now, because there's going to be some scurrilous things mentioned about some of them.
We all are.
I am also going to explore tonight the interrelationships of the various European royal families, because we cannot talk about the British royal family without bringing in almost every other European royal family. Now, not all of the European royal families are actually on throne, been dethroned. The only one that I can figure out, the only two that I can figure out that the British royal family are not related to is Italy and Serbia. Well, I see that provoked quite a response, didn't it? We're going to go back in time a little bit. There was a time, not so long ago, that when a person in a royal family wished to get married, they had to marry a person from another royal family. Now, you identify royal families by the royal house of, and then fill in the blank. And that royal house of can be a place name or it can be a family surname. In the case of the British royal family, we have a whole succession of changes of that, because in 1688 it was the House of Stuart, it's a family name, and then in that year it changed, 1714. I know you're going to catch me on dates, so I'm going to try to be very careful about that. In 1714, it changed to the House of Hanover, which is a geographical place name. Then it changed again in 1837 to the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which is also a place name. Incidentally, I'm going to be saying words from a foreign language, and I don't speak any of them. So if I mispronounce them, just don't correct me, okay? Just accept what I say. Then in 1917, during World War I, because Britain was fighting Germany, and Saxe-Coburg-Gotha is a German principality, King George V decided to change the name of the royal house in England from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor. So it was the House of Windsor for a period of time. Then in 1952, King George VI died, was succeeded by his daughter, who became Queen Elizabeth II, and she was married to Prince Philip of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glücksburg. Well, that's quite a mouthful. He was a prince of both Denmark and Greece. So instead of using that Windsor-Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg-Glücksburg, he adopted his mother's maiden name, which was Battenberg, but that's German, and they still didn't want that because they just finished fighting Germany in World War II, so they anglicized that to Mountbatten, which is the translation for Battenberg, of course. So the English royal house today is Mountbatten, the Royal House of Mountbatten, Windsor. Now, there is an exam at the end of this program, so I want you to remember that. There is also certain rules that used to be always followed by royal families that aren't so much anymore. One of them was that the sovereign, whoever was king and queen of a country, would have to give permission for a member of the royal family to get married. And if they denied permission, then the marriage would not be a legal or legitimate marriage. I also needed to point out that certain European countries are governed by what is called the Salic law, S-A-L-I-C, which says that very definitely only males may inherit titles or property. So if you are under the Salic law, your country is under the Salic law, then a female cannot inherit the throne or any other title or any other property. In 1688, in the Glorious Revolution in Britain, the Act of Succession was passed, an Act of Parliament, which stated, among other things, and you don't need to know all of the provisions of it, but one of the provisions was that the royal family members could not marry a Roman Catholic. Well, that was no different than many of the continental countries where if the Roman Catholic Church was the state church, then members of the royal family had to marry a Roman Catholic. In Britain, it was not that they had to marry a member of the Church of England, but they had to marry a Protestant. The Act of Succession in 1688 was very firm about that. Incidentally, how many of you can give me the year in which the heptarchy, the 7 kingdoms of Britain, united into one country and had a single king? No? It was 802. Now that is a very long time ago. 802, the heptarchy, the 7 kingdoms were united into one kingdom, and the first king of England, I won't say Britain, but England, was King Egbert. Have you heard of King Egbert? You're familiar with King Egbert? Karen is shaking her head. I'm sorry. that you haven't heard of King Egbert, no. We don't need to know that. That is not going to be on the final exam, so you do not need to retain that. However, going back to the point where royal people have to marry royal people, and that was true for the most part through the 19th century. Well, where are you going to find that many royal people to marry? Because families were large. King George III had 15 children. They have to find royal spouses. Well, it happened that on the continent, there were 338 independent states or countries where the German language was the official language. So you have 338 royal families. Well, you see, the pool is getting large there with 330. I am telling you something wrong. Some of those were ruled by a Roman Catholic archbishop, so we will presume that he did not have children who had to get married. But 330 independent states. That was true until 1815. In 1815, after the Napoleonic Wars, the Congress of Vienna reduced those 338 independent German-speaking countries to 39. Well, that's still a very large number of German-speaking countries, and you will find that most of the royal families of Europe managed to find spouses, male or female, from one of the 39 German-speaking countries, because some of those were Roman Catholic, some of them were Lutheran, and some of them were other kinds of Protestants. Okay, so you're satisfied now and you're calm that there are enough members of royal families scattered about Europe that you can find somebody to marry if you really want to. You're agreed with that. Okay, the next point that I want to make after I take a drink of water is the difference between a head of state and a head of government. That is on the final exam. Queen Elizabeth II of Britain is the head of state. A head of state in year 2021, there, as most other places, is largely a ceremonial position. It is a symbolic position. She signs laws, she opens parliament, and she does lots of things. She greets heads of state from other countries, as witnessed lately at the G7 when she invited President Biden and his wife to tea at Windsor Castle and so on. She receives the accreditation of diplomats, especially ambassadors from other countries. And she would do a great deal more if she weren't 95 years old, but there is a limit to the stamina of 95-year-olds. I'm looking at some of them, aren't I? So therefore, a lot of the responsibilities and duties and work of the royal family, of the Queen rather, is extended to other members of the royal family, working members of the royal family. Keep that in mind. There are members of the royal family who are working members, and there are members of the royal family who are not working. And we'll get more of that later. Well, what do they do? Well, they do lots of things. Heads of state, she and the other members do lots of things. I just listed a few of them. They dedicate new schools and hospitals, open new bridges and highways, dedicate airports, harbors, present awards, pin on medals, cut ribbons, give speeches, attend luncheons and dinners, visit high school classes and hospital patients, and et cetera, et cetera. When you have a country with a head of state, the ceremonial duties are largely performed by the head of state. The alternative is the head of government. In Britain, the head of government is the prime minister. The prime minister's role is to govern the country, create policy, get laws passed. He has a supporting cabinet of people who do that, just as our president has a supporting cabinet. But the difference between the head of state and the head of government is that the head of state, at least in Britain, is there for life. So there is a long, long period of experience in doing these things. The head of government is subject to party politics, to elections, and their span of time and power may be very, very short. Maybe longer than some people wanted, but it varies. It's not nearly as long as the head of state. Now, Britain and a great many other countries in Europe, I'm not saying outside of Europe, do have a head of state and a head of government. They have divided the responsibilities so that the ceremonial duties are taken care of by the head of state. The head of government takes care of the actual functioning of the administration and management of the country and of the government. Boris Johnson is the present Prime Minister of England. And they don't always have the title of king or queen if they're head of state. They may also be a president, as in the case of France. Or they may have another title. The head of government isn't always the prime minister. He or she may be a premier, maybe a chancellor, as in the case of Ms. Merkel in Germany. She is a chancellor, or they may have another title as well. Well, keep in mind that the head of state usually has not very much political power. The head of government has that. But if you have a head of state to perform the ceremonial tasks, it leaves the head of government to do the work of governing. In the United States, we have combined those, and we expect the president and the vice president to do both the governing and the ceremonial duties. President Biden, not too long ago, gave a high school graduation address. Well, in a country where the jobs are divided, the head of state would have done that, not the head of government. I'm going to go back in time now to King George III. I'm going to come back to something that I know you all want to hear about, and that's the money. But before we get to that, let's go back to the matter of who gets married to whom and what ramifications there are of that. That was, until World War I, a very important matter, because heads of state and their offspring and their grandchildren and so on were scattered about Europe. And so when you wanted something diplomatic done, you could simply call your nephew, who was the king of some other country, and talk to him about it. Call him, yes, the telephone was invented then. The whole idea of family relationships being important diplomatically ended with World War I. It is, I think I can safely say it is not important after World War I. But remember, World War I, Britain, France, and Russia were fighting Germany, Austria, and Turkey. Well, the King of England was a cousin of the Kaiser of Germany and the Tsar of Russia. So you have cousins fighting a war. Presumably, they might have solved it diplomatically at a family reunion, but they actually did not do that. Okay, back to King George III. King George III quite dutifully married a princess, Princess Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. And I don't want you to get that confused with Mecklenburg-Schwerin. That's another place. You were confused about that, weren't you, Johnny? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, he and his wife, as I said before, had 15 children. Their oldest son was named George. We had a string of names, but George is sufficient. And he dutifully married Princess Caroline of Brunswick. And it was a, how shall I phrase this delicately, an arranged marriage. And I have to come to the conclusion, because of what happened later, that they didn't really care for one another when they met one another for the first time. They did, however, get together at least one time because they produced a daughter, Princess Charlotte. But thereafter, they lived totally separate lives. He had mistresses, and she was, dare I say, notorious for traveling about Europe in the company of very young gypsy men. So, does that not shock you a bit? Well, it led to something sort of unfortunate. Princess Charlotte is, for a while, the only legitimate grandchild of King George III. Out of 15 children, one legitimate grandchild? Does that seem slightly odd? Well, Princess Charlotte very dutifully married a German prince. His name was Prince Leopold, and he was of the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. They had a, well, I can't say they had a child because she died in childbirth and the child died also. And what did I tell you about her? She was the only legitimate grandchild of King George III, and she just died in childbirth. There are no legitimate grandchildren that are eligible to become the next king or queen of England. So what happens is a very unfortunate period in English history. King George, Prince George, the eldest son, does not want to get married again. He's already married to Princess Caroline, and she's doing her thing and he's doing his thing. They aren't going to get together again. They are not going to have any more children. Well, there's the next son, who is the Duke of York, and he is married to a princess, but they have no children. Well, no luck for an heir to the throne there. The next son is the Duke of Clarence, and he is married to, I know this is going to shock you, but he is married morganatically to an actress. Yes, as well your jaw should drop about that, yes. What does that mean, to be morganatically married to anybody, not just an actress? It means that the marriage is not recognized and the children do not inherit title or property. Okay? Well, they had 10 children, so there are plenty of illegitimate grandchildren, but there are no legitimate grandchildren there. Then there is Charlotte, the Princess Royal, and she married the man who became the King of Württemberg, but their children are not going to be eligible for the throne of England. The next son is the Duke of Kent, and he has morganatically married a French woman named Julie Saint-Laurent, and they have a couple of children, but they're not legitimate for purposes of succeeding to the throne. Well, he, the Duke of Clarence, the Duke of Cumberland, and the Duke of Sussex, who are the remaining sons of King George III, they're all middle-aged men by this time. They immediately rush over, I say rush over, I wasn't there, I don't know that they rushed over, but they all went over to the continent of Europe to find eligible German or otherwise princesses who were of childbearing age who could stand to be around them. And sure enough, the Duke of Clarence found one. He found Princess Adelaide of Saxe-Meiningen and married her legally. Okay, That's good. Duke of Kent found an eligible widow named Princess Victoire of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. And she was widowed, but she had 2 children. She had proved that she could bear children. This was very important. They're looking for an heir. I cannot emphasize that too much. Incidentally, she is the sister of Prince Leopold, who was Princess Charlotte's husband. You got that straight? You have to do a genealogical chart at the end, you know. We don't need to go into the Duke of Cumberland and the Duke of Sussex, but they each found people to marry. Let's see, the Duke of Cumberland married the Duchess of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. Duke of Sussex, by golly, I told you wrong. He didn't ever find a German princess, but the Duke of Cambridge did find Princess Augusta of Hesse-Kassel. Okay, well, the Duke of Clarence's, that's the second son, and his wife had the 2 daughters, but they died as children. So they cannot succeed to the throne if they die as children. The Duke of Kent and Princess Victoire produced a daughter, and he promptly died. Not the daughter, Duke of Kent died. So Princess Victoire is in England with a daughter who is the direct heir to the throne of Britain. Her name was Princess Alexandrina. Remember that name, Princess Alexandrina. Princess Victoire, Alexandrina's mother, was not a pleasant woman. Well, her husband, Duke of Kent, wasn't a pleasant man either, so we can't go there. But she fell under the influence of a man named John Conroy, who was the comptroller in her household. And I don't know that they ever did anything illicit, but he was, how shall I say it, influential over her behavior. And she is the mother of the girl who's going to be Queen of England. And so he sees a way to feather his nest in all of this. So he tries to get the girl, as she gets a little older, to sign a paper saying that he will be regent if she succeeds to the throne before she's age 18. And she consistently refuses to sign that paper. Alexandrina was a person who had a stubborn streak, I think we could say. That fuss went on, but George, the oldest son, ultimately became King of England. King George III, you know, had a problem. He was not always mentally coherent. And that was periodic for a while, but after 1810 it was full-time, and so his oldest son, George, became the Prince Regent, ruler in effect. And then in 1820, finally, King George III died after 60 years on the throne. The present queen is going to make 70 years, I hope. Keep your fingers crossed. February. If she does, she will be the second longest reigning monarch in European history. 70 years. Who was monarch longer than that anywhere in Europe? Come on, tell me. You know that. You all went to school, didn't you? Nobody ever mentioned any of this, did they? King Louis XIV of France was king for 72 years. If Queen Elizabeth II is lucky, and I hope she is, maybe she'll pass him and be the longest reigning monarch. Anyway, King George IV, the eldest son of King George III, is king for 10 years. He's succeeded by his next brother, William the Fourth in 1830. But William and his wife, remember, Adelaide, had the two children, but they died as young girls. Well, it becomes King William's the Fourth's goal in life to live long enough that Princess Alexandrina will be past 18 and she won't have to have a regent, and her mother and John Conroy won't have any power. Well, King William IV did not always behave with great decorum. He would invite Princess Victoire and her daughter to come to banquets at the palace, at Buckingham Palace, but then he would spend the evening shouting insults at Princess Victoire, which is not good etiquette, is it? No, they don't do things. Well, he did do things, but he also, as he was riding around in his carriage in the streets of London, so I've heard, now I did not see this happen, used to shout insults out the window of the carriage at the passers-by and sometimes spit on them. Well, that's not really nice behavior either. But anyway, he got his wish. Princess Alexandrina became 18 in May of 1837. King William IV died in June of 1837. So he barely made it, but he did make it. Princess Alexandrina became Queen of England. You've never heard of her. Yes, you have, because she chose to be crowned Queen Victoria. Her name is Alexandrina Victoria. She was named after her godfather, who was Tsar Alexander of Russia. I'm sure all of you know this. I don't have to go over it, do I? James is back there nodding. Is that because you're sleepy, James? Anyway, just to carry that little matter a little farther, Queen Elizabeth II's name is Elizabeth Alexandra Mary. She was named after her grandmother and great-grandmother. So she became queen with her own name. But her father, King George VI, his name was Albert. So he chose to be King George. The preceding king was King Edward VIII, and his name was David. So he chose a name. George V really was George, but King Edward VII was Albert, and he chose to be Edward. Why I'm pointing this out is because when Queen Elizabeth, may it be a long time in the future, dies, the Prince of Wales will become King of England automatically at that moment. And his name is Charles, but he doesn't have to become King Charles III. He can become King George, King Edward, King Philip, King William, anything he wants to be. So bear that in mind. Queen Victoria, as she became at age 18, she was Queen of England until 1901, 63 and a half years. It was the longest reign until the current one. She was encouraged by her government. Remember, the Queen in England at this time as a constitutional monarch has very little individual power. In fact, Walter Bagehot wrote a book called The English Constitution, which is not like ours. It's not a document. It's a collection of traditions and laws over time. He says that the power of the monarch in England lies in two things. He or she can advise the government, or he or she can warn the government. But in many cases, the king or queen has been in office longer than the prime minister and the cabinet, and so therefore they do have more experience and sometimes have more common sense too, for that matter. Not always. Anyway, her cabinet tried to encourage her to get married because, remember, heirs to the throne are short on the ground around here. And she resists this because she kind of is enjoying being queen. I have not mentioned her upbringing, but her mother suppressed almost every normal instinct in her daughter. Her daughter slept in a bed beside her mother's bed, the same bedroom. She was not allowed to go up and down stairs without somebody holding her hand. John Conroy was constantly badgering her, trying to get her to sign a document of regency, which she never did do, didn't need to do. But expect, if you think about it for just a minute, you can imagine what her first act as Queen of England was. She got her own bedroom, and she walked up and down stairs by herself with nobody holding her hand. And she expelled John Conroy from the palace. I'm not fond of John Conroy. I think that was good riddance. Anyway, she came under the influence. She kind of moved her mother out of the palace too, as far as that goes. She came under the influence of two men. One was her uncle Leopold, remember, husband of Princess Charlotte? Well, there's music. There's music. It's not the coronation march either. In 1830, Prince Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha had been chosen to be king of the new country of Belgium. So he is King Leopold. And he becomes a great influence on on Queen Victoria. He introduces her to a professor from, guess where, Coburg, his home country, named Baron Stockmar. And Baron Stockmar and King Leopold I of Belgium become kind of her mentors and her patrons and her instructors in how to be a king and so on. How to be a queen. I guess she couldn't be a king. They encourage her to get married. Her cabinet is encouraging her to get married. The people want her to get married. Well, I don't know if the people really care, but they need to have an heir to the throne. And she keeps resisting them until a handsome young man from one of the German principalities arrives for a state visit at Buckingham Palace, and she is sort of smitten with him. And guess where he's from? Coburg, where her mother is from and where her Uncle Leopold is from, and he is her first cousin. But that's okay. He's eligible, he's Protestant, he's royal. She is smitten with him, and they get married. His name is Albert, Prince Albert. Victoria and Albert then proceed to have 9 children. So there is no problem anymore for heirs or heiresses to the throne. There are plenty of them. I'm going to go through their 9 children just to show you how the system started to break down in the 19th century. Their oldest daughter married the man who became Kaiser Frederick III of Germany. Okay, that's a pretty good marriage to marry the Emperor of Germany. Their eldest son would become the King of England. Their next daughter married a German prince, Prince Ludwig of Hesse. Their next son, Alfred, married the Grand Duchess Marie of Russia. The next daughter married Prince Frederick Christian of Schleswig-Holstein. The next son, Arthur, married Princess Louise of Prussia. The next son, Leopold, married Princess Helena of Waldeck-Pyrmont. And the youngest daughter, Beatrice, married Prince Henry of Battenberg. That's 8 children. I left one out. I left out their daughter, Louise. She did something shocking. She did not marry somebody royal. You're supposed to say, when I said that. She was the first member that I have found of the royal, I could be proven wrong, but the first member that I have found of the British royal family to legally marry somebody who wasn't royal. She married, he wasn't, just somebody off the street. He was the Duke of Argyll, but he wasn't royal. Well, I'm going to introduce you to another person now who is allied to the British royalty, but indirectly. His name is King Christian IX of Denmark. King Christian IX of Denmark married royalty, naturally, Queen Louise, and they had 6 children. Now, I want to know if anybody in this room has a family that can match that family for marriages moving up the ladder, of the social ladder. Okay, their eldest son, Frederick, would become king of Denmark when his father died, okay? Their eldest son, next eldest son, George, was chosen to be king of the new country of Greece, which has just been liberated from the Ottoman Empire. So he became King George of Greece. Okay, you've got 2 kings so far. Princess Alexandra married the eldest son of Queen Victoria, so she's going to be Queen of England. 2 kings and a queen so far. The next daughter, Dagmar, married the man who will become Tsar Nicholas, not Tsar Nicholas II, Tsar Alexander III of Russia, so she will become an empress. You see how they're going? King, queen, empress. This is good stuff. They're all approved. And then the third daughter was Princess Tyra, and she married the man who would become the King of Hanover. So you've got king, queen, empress, and queen. I always have felt sorry for the poor younger brother, the 6th son. His name was Valdemar, Prince Valdemar, and I'm sure he was a delightful young man, but he never got to be a king and he didn't marry a queen. So there you have it. I mention all of this not just because I find it interesting, although I do. I mention it because the children and the grandchildren of Queen Victoria and King Christian IX of Denmark scatter around Europe and ultimately control the thrones of every country except, as I mentioned earlier, Italy and Serbia. They are, well, I better not do that. I don't have that much time to go through all of their marriages. Anyway, you want to get to the money in the British monarchy, don't you? Or you, by now you're bored out of your minds and you don't care what happens, one or the other. Okay, the British monarchy has had since 1760, with the accession of King George III, an agreement with Parliament that in return for the Crown estates being turned over to the government, that they will receive an income from the government. Before this, they had had their own private income. But the Crown estates are now turned over to the government, Parliament in effect, and they in return get a stipend from that. From 1760 until quite lately, that was called the civil list. And it depended on how much money the Crown Estates produced, of course. This is both land, it's other kinds of investments, factories, rental property, and so on. It was a good agreement, I think, for both sides. I think I'm right on this. For the first century or two, the crown, or the monarch, got 15% of the total income from the crown estates. It has lately been elevated a little bit beyond that. But anyway, the sun's coming in. The civil list, can we do a screen? Lindsay, my faithful assistant. I really, no, that's the wrong one. Oh, there they go. There they go. I should never question Lindsay. She's the electronic expert. At any rate, in let's see, 1972, the system was changed so that the amount of the percentage of the income from the Crown Estates was not set at the beginning of each reign, but every 20 years instead. I don't know why they changed that, but then they did. But in 2011 and 2012, they changed it yet again to something called, it was really basically the same system, but they changed the name of it to the sovereign grant. And they increased the amount of money received by the king or queen, in this case queen, to 25% of the total. Now, there's a lot of criticism in Britain and elsewhere, where it's none of their business, about the monarchy costing the taxpayers of Britain so much money. Well, let me tell you, the government of Britain makes a profit on the monarchy. They do. It's not a drain on the taxpayers at all. Because I couldn't get any figures later than 2017, but that'll give you an idea of it. The income profit from the Crown Estates was £328,800,000. David, what's the exchange rate? I thought you would know that. At any rate, all that 25% of that, if my math is correct, would be about 82 million pounds. So that's what the royal family would get. But the government would keep about 250 million pounds. So other than not being a drain on the taxpayers, they're actually providing money. The government of England makes a profit on the royal family. That's not the only income for the royal family. There's something called the Duchy of Lancaster. And since the year 1399, the income from that estate is paid into the keeper of the privy purse, who is an official of the British government. And from that, the expenses, private expenses of the Queen and the royal family are taken. In 2017, again, the last year I could find, that was 19 million pounds. Now remember, the Crown Estates money goes for the public expenses of the Queen. The Duchy of Lancaster money goes for the private expenses of the Queen. Do you suppose she can scrape by on 19 million pounds? Probably. But I'm not done yet. There's also something called the Duchy of Cornwall. In 1137, that's a very long time ago, it was decided that the income from this estate would provide the financial support for the Prince of Wales, and it still does. There again, the money, the estate is managed, in both cases, managed by government agencies. In the case of the Duchy of Lancaster, it's a cabinet minister who administers it. The Duchy of Cornwall is administered privately, and the money all goes to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, like our Secretary of the Treasury, and then is returned then to the Prince of Wales. In 2020, I got more up-to-date figures for that one. The Duchy of Cornwall provided £22 million. So the Prince of Wales supports himself from that. So he has not a burden on the Queen, who has to support all of the other members of the royal family, because the government frowns upon, and in some cases forbids, any of them from working for wages because they are in competition with ordinary citizens. Example, the Earl of Wessex, the Queen's youngest son, Prince Edward, had a business that he operated that was supporting him and making money. And then he married Sophie Rhys-Jones, who's now the Countess of Wessex, who also was operating a private business that was profitable. But once they got married, there was such a fuss in the media again, and even in Parliament, that they were competing unfairly against the ordinary citizens who were trying to make a living from businesses. So they both liquidated their businesses and are now dependent on the sovereign grant. They were self-supporting, but I think very few members of the royal family, they have to be pretty distant before there wouldn't be a big fuss if they started competing anyway. Then I thought you might be interested in Queen Elizabeth's expenses. You do know that Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle are property of Britain, not of her. She lives in them, and she does not, as far as I know, pay rent. But other members of the royal family who live in places like Kensington Palace and Clarence House do pay rent. So it's not like they are living totally in the lap of luxury. Okay, Queen Elizabeth's expenses for the year 2017. I don't know why I can't find more recent ones, but I couldn't. Anyway, the payroll for her, the staff of all the palaces and so on is £20 million that she has to pay. Staff benefits, because there are pension funds and health insurance and so on, about £1.5 million. Maintenance and repair of the properties, which is also her responsibility, amounts to almost £20 million. Travel expenses, about £4.5 million. Hospitality, I'm talking about pounds sterling, the money here. Hospitality and housekeeping, about £2.5 million. And that would include entertaining the members of the G7 that were just in England and things of that sort. And utilities, a little over £3 million that she has to pay. So making total expenses of about £50 million that she's responsible for. We're talking big money. That's more than any of you have to pay for anything, isn't it? Yeah. Now, another criticism of the monarchy is that they don't do anything. That they don't do anything, and that they're just kind of useless blots on humanity, which is not true. And I have from the official source, the court circular, which is a record of all of the appointments and engagements of members of the royal family for the year 2018 and 19. So that's fairly recent. In 2018, the members of the royal family in combination fulfilled official appointments and engagements to the total of 3,793 of them. Now there are 365 days in a year and 24 hours in a day, so keep that in mind. In 2019, the total was only 3,567. So we're slacking off about 200 appointments. And it's broken down, the court circular is by individual members. Now remember, the Queen herself is 95 years old, so you cannot be expecting her to do half a dozen engagements and appointments every day. At least I don't think you ought to be expecting that. Okay, here is the breakdown in 2019. The Prince of Wales had 521 official engagements. That's more than one a day. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, had 506 official engagements. Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex, had 308. The Queen herself in 2019 had 295 official engagements. Prince Andrew, back in the days when he was still a working member of the royal family, which he is not anymore, had 274. The Countess of Wessex, 236. The Duke of Gloucester, who is a cousin once removed of the Queen, 226. The Duchess of Cornwall, who is the wife of the Prince of Wales, 224. And the Duke of Kent, who is a first cousin once removed of the Queen, over 200. And that figure I couldn't get exact because it was in a graph and the print was so small I couldn't read it. But at any rate, you cannot say that they loll about and don't do anything. Anybody who does 521 official engagements in a year is busy. It's really busy. And I have, in the last 2 minutes, reprints from the court circular, the official record of their engagements, some ideas of what they might do. On the 10th of June, the Prince of Wales met with, I don't know if you call that an appointment or engagement, with Secretary John Kerry of the United States, the Special Envoy for Climate. And they do lesser things. The Duchess of Cornwall, on the 10th of June, visited the Garden Museum in London to celebrate British Flowers Week. The Princess Royal, that's Princess Anne, on the 9th of June, because she was the honorary president of this group, visited the Oxford Farming Conference and the Oxford Farmers Club, and was received by Mr. Kevin Travers Haley, Deputy Lieutenant of Greater London. Let's see, on the 9th of June, the Prince of Wales visited the Royal National Lifeboat Institute College in Poole and was received by Her Majesty's Lord Lieutenant of Dorset, Mr. Angus Campbell. And it goes on and on and on and on like that. The one that interested me the most was the that can't be right. Yes, it is. The Duchess of Cornwall, Prince of Wales' wife, who is the patron of the Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. I'm not familiar with that, but I'm sure it does good work. Visited the home on the 9th of June, and she was there because she was dedicating, is the wrong word, having an official ceremony because they were replacing the chief executive of the Dogs and Cats home. And the old one was going out and the new one was coming in. And I was most intrigued because the one that was leaving the post was a woman named Claire Horton. And I thought, oh, my relatives are getting met by the royalty here. And the newcomer coming in was Peter Loren. But they're just pages and pages and pages of court circular of what they do. And I can't say that in most cases there are things that I would care to do, but I'm not royal, so I don't have to. And I'm sure you can all be glad about that I am not royal. One last thing, I'm 30 seconds over, but you haven't all walked out yet, so I'll go ahead. Part of the charitable, it sounds like they have a lot of money, but there's a lot of charitable gifts too. And the Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, the oldest son of the Prince of Wales, has just last year, October the 8th, in fact, established something called the Earthshot Prize. And he is, from his personal funds, going to give a £1 million award each year for the next 10 years to the winner of the person or organization or whatever who presents the best environmental safety plan. And he has 5 points that these are to meet. They are to either be something that will protect and restore nature, clean the air, revive the oceans, build a waste-free world, or do something about the climate. So that's partially what the money that they get from the Duchy of Lancaster and the Duchy of Cornwall, part of what it goes. And I think that's sort of a worthwhile cause. And I really think that some of you should apply because it says it's available for individuals and it's available for organizations, businesses, cities, countries, and you're all individuals and you should apply. Couldn't you use £1 million? Well, I have bored you long enough. It is 8 o'clock. I'd be glad to answer questions, but I don't want to keep people here who don't want to be here. So why don't we say that the meeting is now adjourned, and those of you who want to go home can go home, and those of you who want to ask questions can ask questions. Was it anything at all like you expected it to be? No. Ask question.
You talked about working royals.
Yes.
How do you get to not be a working royal?
You do what the young man did who's now living in a mansion in Los Angeles. You erase yourself from the royal family.